Welcome to Awareness to Action, a podcast brought to you by Northwestern Community Services Prevention and Wellness. I'm your host, Casey, a social worker and prevention and wellness specialist here in Virginia. Our goal is to bring you stories of people who are engaging in their communities in meaningful ways, to hopefully inspire and encourage you to seek those connections in your own community.
Hello and welcome back to Awareness to Action. Today we have Sam DeMello joining us on the show. Drawing from his personal recovery journey from gambling addiction and more than 15 years in strategic leadership, Sam founded Evive to revolutionize gambling support. His vision combines authenticity and innovation to deliver stigma-free, accessible help when people need it most. Sam's work makes a convincing case for the power of interdisciplinary collaboration, for the importance of sharing your story, and for the creative ways that technology can change the landscape of how we provide and receive care. I loved learning more about Evive through my conversation with Sam and rethinking technology and harm reduction, and I'm excited to share our conversation with you. As a heads up, Sam and I discuss problem gambling, suicide, and substance use in this episode. It may be difficult for some listeners. As a reminder, help is always available. The Suicide and Crisis Lifeline can be reached by texting or calling 988. All right, Sam, thank you for coming on the show today.
Thanks for having me.
So we will cover a lot in this conversation, but let's start with you telling our listeners a little bit about yourself and the path you took to get to where you are now.
Yeah, sure. So professionally, I've worked in the technology and then later the digital therapeutic space for the last 15 years or so. I'm not a computer programmer. I'm not a software developer. I started in customer support like a lot of folks, ended up finding my way to recruiting, and I've been helping to build and scale companies for the last 8 or 9 years. Personally, probably more importantly for this podcast, I'm in recovery from a gambling addiction. I'm 37 years old. I've been in recovery for about 5 years at this point, but my experience with gambling and my addiction and my challenges to find recovery are really what led me to start this company.
I would love for you to kind of talk through how gambling started in your life and then really how we got to this company that we're going to talk about.
Yeah, sure. So when I was 12 years old, I am like the poster boy for the poker boom of the early 2000s in the United States. Chris Moneymaker, who was an amateur, won the World Series of Poker. It was televised on ESPN, and I was always good at cards. Poker was the first thing that I was ever good at that was cool, and I was better than my friends. I really saw it as my kind of pathway to masculinity, especially as a teenage boy. I couldn't really compete with my buddies on the football field, right? And I thought that they were much cooler than me, but this gave me this kind of even playing field to compete with. I played all through middle school and all through high school. And at that point, I didn't know what a gambling addiction was, right? The way that I saw it was if I won money, that was good. If I lost money, that was bad. If I lost too much money and I went into debt, that was when things became a problem. And my parents saw it the same way. Nobody talked about gambling harm or gambling addiction. They bought me a poker table for my 15th birthday. I think from their perspective, we were sitting around the kitchen table playing for 20 bucks. And what was the worst that was going to happen, right? I was going to lose 20, 40 bucks. Like it wasn't going to affect my life. But as I got into college and I graduated from playing in the dorm rooms to playing in the casino that was an hour away from my school, it started to take up more and more of my time. I had a really hard time setting limits on the amount of time or the amount of money that I was going to play with. I would say I'm only going to go to the casino on Friday and Saturday nights. And then it became Mondays and Tuesdays and, slippery slope. Same thing with money. I'm only going to take $100 with me. I'm only going to take another 100 out of the ATM if I lose. Pretty soon, I got to the point where I was losing the money in my pocket and then withdrawing the max on my ATM and then borrowing money from my friends. And throughout all of this, I still looked at gambling problems as financially related. I didn't look at the amount of time that I was spending. I didn't think about how much of a distraction this became for me from my schooling, or really how much of my time I could have been spending exploring other activities in school or making new friends, but I really just spent it around a poker table. The kind of saving grace for me at that point was that if I had to stay out of the casino, if I lost too much money and I needed to not gamble for a couple weeks, I just physically had to stay out of the casino, right? And there was this big natural barrier of this hour-long car ride in between me and my opportunity to play. I graduated from school. I did not do the best that I could. I graduated with a C average, but I got my degree. I left the country for a couple years and taught English abroad. And then I moved back to the United States when I was 23, and I moved into my mom's basement and I started my career as a young person, and I got introduced to sports betting. And I think more importantly for me, betting online. And just like poker, I thought of it as financial harm. And, just like poker, I looked at it as something that I could do with my friends, and it would help me reestablish these connections with people that I grew up with, but maybe grew apart from in college. And I started with a $10 bet on my local basketball team, which was the Golden State Warriors. And I can't remember if I won or I lost, but I definitely remember that it was the first time that I, A, felt genuinely interested in the outcome of the game, and B, felt connected with my buddies again on this kind of even playing field. The same way as poker, I never really felt like I was one of the guys, and I was never really that interested in sports, but this gave me this connection, right? This kind of entrance into camaraderie with my friends. And just like poker, very quickly, I started to go down that slippery slope. A $10 bet became a $20 bet, became a $50 bet. And betting only on games that I was watching with my friends turned into betting on games that I wasn't watching, but basketball and soccer, sports that I followed and I knew something about. Well, 6 months later, I'm making $100 bets on like Ukrainian women's ping pong at 2 in the morning, which sounds absolutely ridiculous to say in retrospect, and never somewhere that I ever thought I would end up at the beginning. But just slowly and incrementally over time, it got to the point where I had to bet, right? It became something in my life where I kind of woke up one day and I realized, man, I'm not betting because I'm actually enjoying the experience of watching the game with money on it. I'm betting because I'm feeling compelled to. However, I still thought of this as a financial problem. And as long as I wasn't going into debt, it wasn't an issue for me. And luckily, I came back to the United States. I started my career in the technology industry, and I started making money. And very quickly, over a couple years, I went from making $25,000 or $30,000 a year to over $100,000 a year. And the way that I looked at my gambling money was it was just disposable income. And it didn't matter to me if I used that money on gambling, or if I used that money to take a trip, or if I used that money to go out with my friends. It was money that I was using for entertainment. And unsurprisingly, all of that money went to gambling. And over the course of probably 7 years, I would say from the time that I was 23 to the time that I was 30, I don't have an exact number, but I probably worked on average 70 to 80 hours a week in these really intense tech jobs in increasing roles of leadership. And I probably lost close to $500,000. And I don't have crazy stories like I lost $50,000 in a weekend, I just lost $1,000 a week every single week for a decade. And the financial part was frustrating and was increasingly frustrating because I kept feeling like I was working and I was just setting my money on fire. But what was worse is that I started to feel really ashamed about what I was doing because I was embarrassed about it. I would win, I would tell myself to cash out, I wouldn't, I would lose that money. It wouldn't matter how much I would win or how much I was up. I couldn't stop, right? And mathematically, as long as I was still gambling, I was going to lose. And as I kept feeling shameful about what I was doing and out of control, I didn't talk to anybody about it because I was super embarrassed. I didn't tell my friends, I didn't tell my coworkers, I didn't tell my parents. And so I got into this cycle where my paycheck would come on Friday. I would spend the week before payday making a plan on what I was going to do, right? I'm going to take my paycheck. I'm only going to take 500 bucks. I'm going to go to the poker room. I'm not going to sports bet. I'm not going to bet on slot machines. I'm not going to go to blackjack. I'm going to walk in and I'm going to sit down at the $1, $2 game. My paycheck would come. Before I even got to the casino, I would have lost the entire thing on my phone driving over there because I was just so out of control. And then I would feel so weak and morally bad and weak willed that I would punish myself for the next 2 weeks until payday came. I wouldn't buy food at the grocery store, right? I would eat as cheaply as possible. I wouldn't go out with my friends or do things with them. I would make excuses. I would go into the gym and I would, kill myself working out, right? I got into probably the best shape of my life at that point, and that was something that I think normally I would have taken a lot of pride over. But what happened is that as people started to see these outward successes, like in my career and in my physical abilities, I started running marathons and ultra marathons, and all of these things were public, and people would come to me and say, "Man, I'm so proud of you. You're doing so well. Like, good job." And I would just smile and internally be like, "Wow, you just don't know that I'm this terrible, weak, awful person." It created this really awful dissonance in my life between how people saw me and how I saw myself. And it made me really, really isolated. And it made me gamble more as a coping mechanism for all of this shame. It was a really terrible cycle. And so finally, after 7 years of this, I turned 30, just about, and I started looking around and I said, man, my friends are buying houses and they're in relationships and they're having kids. And I have nothing. Like, I've done nothing but work for most of this decade of my life. I've wasted all of this time. I've wasted all of these resources, and I have nothing to show for it. And because I was gambling so much, and now I know that it was really affecting my brain chemistry and my dopamine, I was numb to everything. I wasn't feeling joy in things that used to really make me happy. And I thought for the first time, I really need to do something about this. I need some help because I can't stop gambling and it's really starting to ruin my life. And so, like a lot of people, I didn't know what to do. I looked online and I found a therapist who said that they specialized in addictions. And I walked in and I think I said, I have a bad habit. you know, I didn't use the word addiction, but I said, I have this bad gambling problem and I need some help with it. And they said, okay, tell me about your childhood and the trauma that you must have experienced. And I said, man, I see myself as this incredibly privileged individual, right? I'm super well educated. I have this incredibly supportive family that would do anything for me. I have this career and this job. I don't have this trauma that I'm trying to escape. And they said, yeah, you do. Like, this is where behavioral addictions come from. I said, oh, okay. It just didn't resonate with me. And then they recommended that I go to a Gamblers Anonymous meeting. At that point, I did not know that Gamblers Anonymous existed. I had heard of Alcoholics Anonymous, probably. And I was very nervous to do so. I waited until I was out of town from my hometown because I was so nervous that someone would see me and my secret would be out. But finally, I walked into a GA meeting and I said out loud, my name is Sam and I'm a compulsive gambler. And that was powerful for me. And I kind of shared my story and I felt some lightness. But then I looked around the room and I realized that I was the youngest person in there by like 25 years. And I was 30 at that point. And I was talking about sports betting on my phone and using cryptocurrency. And most of these people were sharing stories about being at the horse track or being in recovery for 20 plus years. And I just felt that their experience didn't resonate with me and that I was kind of out of place. I wish that I had a more mature outlook on it at that point, but I didn't. I really felt like this isn't for me. And I made myself go for a few months. And ultimately, I decided I'm not getting anything out of this. I guess that I am just kind of destined to be an addict, which at that point I realized that I was. And I just set out to keep functioning as an addict. And I figured I had kept it secret for 7 or 8 years. I could probably just keep doing it. It's a bad decision in retrospect. I probably made it another 18 months or so. And then the wheels started coming off the bus. You know, it wasn't my gambling that ultimately got me caught. I don't know how else to say that, but I was feeling so isolated and so lonely and sad that I started drinking more than I ever had in the past. It started to affect my work and my ability to show up and do my job. And ultimately, what happened for me is I proposed to my fiance at the time. She said yes. And then maybe 2 months after we were engaged, she came to me and she gave me an ultimatum. And she said, I don't know what's going on with you. Like 90% of the time, you're this awesome person who I want to marry, you know? And 10% of the time, you're just this totally different guy that I don't recognize. You're irritable and you drink too much and you're secretive. And if you would have asked my fiance at that point what was going on with me, gambling would not have made the list. There's just no way. Like it wasn't even on her radar. I'm sure she thought that I was, cheating on her or I had a drug problem, right? But she gave me this ultimatum, tell me what's going on or we're not going to get married. And at that point, I had tried therapy, I had tried GA, I had tried cold turkey. I'd probably failed 200 times to quit gambling. And I just told myself, okay, like this is it. Either I'm going to tell this person and I'm going to stop gambling forever. And if I can't do that, if I choose gambling over this person in this future that I want, it's not worth it. Like life isn't worth it at that point. And I'm going to end it. And I got really lucky. My fiance positioned herself as very supportive. She didn't know anything about gambling or addiction. She didn't have any experience there, but she's a lot smarter than me, and opening up to her broke my isolation and having somebody to work on this problem with together who is a researcher and who helped me find resources and learn about the connection between gambling and my brain and all of these things ultimately is what got me into recovery. And I've now been in recovery for about 5 years.
Well, first, thank you for sharing your story. I feel so grateful when people choose to share their story and offer a perspective that maybe I haven't heard before or haven't understood. And hearing you talk about the dissonance between what people were seeing and what you were feeling, it paints a picture for the place that you were at. So I appreciate that. And just as I'm thinking about everything you just shared, I'm thinking about the term hidden addiction that I've
Yeah.
heard that used a lot to describe problem gambling. And it's so interesting to me that gambling addiction gets really not a lot of attention in broader conversations about addiction, and that it can be one that is concealed in a different way than maybe an addiction that has more physical attributions or consequences. And certainly gambling addiction looks different for everyone. And so it might have those physical components for some, but just the idea that it could be like not obvious to your fiance, now wife, who loves you more than anyone and was closer to you than anyone, and that you had these strong relationships and that it could not be there, and that you could walk into a therapist's office and they be surprised that you're talking about gambling and also so sure that it must have been attributed to this one thing. I mean, it paints a picture for how we respond to it. So I just talked a lot. I would like to hear your thoughts on that idea of the hidden addiction and that dissonance.
Yeah, it really is true. I've been thinking about this a lot, especially recently, but what is more taboo, especially in American culture, than talking to somebody about their personal finances, right? It's more appropriate and acceptable to ask somebody their political affiliation or their sexual orientation today than it is to ask somebody, how much money do you have in your bank account, right? Or how much did you spend on that? And I think, especially for me and a lot of folks today, the fact that with your cell phone, you are in the casino 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, right? No matter where you live. If you live in a state that has legalized sports betting, well, it's everywhere. And if you don't, when I was gambling online the most, I was in California. There's still no legal sports betting in California, right? But there are thousands of offshore sports books and sweepstakes casinos that are using loopholes to get around this. There's gambling in video games and trading cards and collectibles and cryptocurrency. I think a lot of times people think of gambling and you think of a casino and blackjack and a slot machine. But man, the way that people are gambling, especially the younger generation today, doesn't look anything like that, and yet is more devastating in a lot of ways. I think the other thing that is really tricky is with other drugs and addictions, there is a physical threshold. There's physiology that kicks in, right? Obviously, in terrible ways, if you look at the opioid epidemic and the ability for somebody to overdose. But there's only so much liquor that you can consume before you get sick and you start to have repercussions, or so many cigarettes you can smoke the first time before you throw up. With casinos today, you can go from betting $1 to betting $10,000, and there is no barrier there. And when we look at cryptocurrency and you remove financial institutions that might put a limit on your credit card or your ATM withdrawal amount, I mean, really, I hear stories all the time of kids losing 70, 80, $100,000 in a night, right? Because they're using these things that are unregulated. It's really scary. I think the last thing that I would say there too, Casey, and sorry, now I'm talking a lot. I'm not a very public person, which sounds funny to say on a podcast. But before I started this company, I really sat down with my wife and I got into recovery. And I was in recovery for about 4 years before anybody knew about it. It was just me and my wife, and I was very quietly in recovery. And when I started Evive, and I'll talk about that in a sec, but I sat down with my wife and I said, if we're going to do this, I have to be open with my story. And part of the reason that I feel like I do is because I don't fit the stereotype that most people have of what a quote unquote addict should look like. And the number of people from my life who have come out, old bosses and family members and friends, and they were just like, I cannot believe this. I had absolutely no idea. And I spent every day with you, right? It's still kind of astounding to me.
And when we think about the ways that the technology has changed, like if thinking of Alcoholics Anonymous, for example, started almost 100 years ago. If you had tried to explain to someone then what we would be facing now, I have grown up in this time and I don't even really understand what we're talking about when we talk about cryptocurrency, for example. But even when we talk about drug use, the drugs that are available now are so different. And the way that we've seen this opioid epidemic expand, the problems have changed, but many of the responses have not. And so that's really where Evive comes into things. And I would love for you to explain how you thought up this very different way of approaching problem gambling.
Yeah. So I got into recovery at the end of 2019 was the start of my recovery. In 2020, my wife and I guess spoiler alert, she stuck with me. We got married. We moved out to Boston, and I took a job at a digital therapeutics company. I did not know what the term digital therapeutics meant at that point. This is essentially companies using software and technology as medicine to address medical concerns. And I took a job for a company called Achille Interactive. They made the first FDA approved mobile video game to treat ADHD in children and adolescents as an alternative or a adjunct to people that were taking stimulants like Ritalin or Adderall. And it just blew my mind. I thought that this was amazing. Wow, I can use my skills in technology to do more than just help people buy more things. I can actually help them get better. And I took this job and I got into recovery, and my life felt amazing. We got married, we had our first kid. It's really hard to describe what it's like getting into recovery after an addiction like this, and I'm sure it's different for everybody. But the best way that I can say it is there's that part in The Wizard of Oz where everything is in black and white, and then all of a sudden she wakes up and everything's in color, you know? And it's really what it felt like. As my dopamine system started to reset and I started to feel things again, I started to really recognize, like, oh man, maybe I'm not a terrible person who's morally weak, right? Maybe there was actually something going on in my brain, and now every day is getting better. And life was good, and I was pretty content to just be in recovery silently and do my thing. And then on January 12th of 2023, which I know is a very specific date, but you'll see why, I got unexpectedly laid off from my job. And an hour later, my wife got unexpectedly laid off from her job. And we had a 1.5-year-old at that point. We were living in an apartment in Boston. We were getting ready to buy our first house. We were looking at having another child. And I lived in a place where I would walk out my door and literally see a casino. And I just went, okay, like disaster, right? Economic stress, personal stress, too much free time. If I don't do something, I'm going to relapse, and I'm going to relapse hard. And for the first time, I felt like maybe I could give back to the problem gambling community. But I didn't know what that was because I wasn't in GA. I didn't have a very positive experience. I wasn't part of a support group. I didn't know what public health looked like or what organizations were doing. And so, as a starting point, I decided to share my story in all of its gory details on Reddit anonymously on this forum that was for people. It's called Problem Gambling. And a lot of folks go there to ask for advice and share stories. And I kind of quietly read things over the years that would remind me, oh, yeah, okay, that, you know, that's why I don't gamble, right? And so I shared my story, and it was very cathartic to kind of get that out there. I went to bed, I didn't think much of it. And then I woke up the next day and I had all of these messages. Man, could I talk to you? Could I pay you to coach me? Like, what did you read and what did you look at? And I've never really heard anybody talk about that specific thing. And I was really taken aback because I'm nobody, right? I don't have a professional degree. I'm not trained as a counselor. I'm just what I think of as like a pretty normal guy that had this experience with gambling. But it really sent me down this rabbit hole, and I was unemployed, so I had time on my hands. And I've heard this from a lot of people in recovery or who have addiction issues. Once I get my mind on something, I tend to go deep. And so I started doing a bunch of research. And what I found was that in the United States, there is no federal money for problem gambling. And the reason for that is that when the federal government legalized gambling at the state level, they basically said to the states, this is your issue. If you choose to legalize it, you are responsible for dealing with the consequences of it. To put that in perspective, in 2021, which is the last year that I have good data for, the federal government spent about $20 billion on substance use, people with a substance abuse problem. We estimate that's about 14% of the US adult population. They spent $0 on gambling, which is about 2.5% of the US adult population. So, pretty big difference. And then at the state level, in 2021, we spent about $12 billion right? All of the states. We spent about $120 million on gambling in that same year. So this issue that affects only 7 times less of the population receives about 350 times less money. And I thought, wow, that's a huge problem. The second thing that I thought was, well, is that money distributed equally? And the answer is no. If you live in Massachusetts like I do, they spend the most money on problem gambling. It's about $30 million or so. If you live somewhere like Kentucky, they spend zero. So there's huge inequity in terms of health and who has access to resources. And then the last piece, which really got me, was most of our approach to public health relies on a 1-800 number that you all have probably seen, 1-800-GAMBLER. And in general, the message is, do you have a gambling problem? Call this number. I'm not the youngest guy. I'm 37, but I'm pretty tech enabled. I don't call anybody. I don't even call my friends. I don't call to order a pizza, right? There are very few things that are going to make me call a 1-800 number. And to think about the amount of shame that I felt when I was in addiction, I never called that number. I never thought that it was for me. I was never willing to admit that without this kind of base level of knowledge. And B, when I looked at the types of calls that were going to 1-800-GAMBLER, a large percentage of them were people that were saying, yeah, I have a gambling problem. I'm trying to make a bet on DraftKings and I can't figure out how to do it, right? So we're not even taking the right phone calls. And when I looked at all of this, the challenges with funding, the problem with access, the lack of health equity, this kind of analog approach, I just thought, man, shouldn't somebody build a digital therapeutic similar to the one that I just spent the last 3.5 years working on for the gambling space? I'm sure that someone is doing it. Let me go find them and let me go work with them. And I spent about 2 months trying to find who was doing it, and I couldn't find them. And ultimately, I just got to this point where I was like, okay, why not me? Right? Kind of reluctantly. I think that this thing needs to exist. I've worked in the industry. I've been a recruiter. I know how to hire people. I can find a software developer. And I think this is a really interesting problem. Maybe I can find and convince really talented people like those that I've spent my career working with to work on this with me. Like, wouldn't that be cool? And so I started by reaching out to a really well-respected researcher and clinical psychologist in the space. His name is Dr. Jeff Murata. I found his name and his phone number on a research paper, and I just cold called him. And whether he sees it as lucky or not, remains to be seen. But he picked up and he agreed to talk to me. And after a couple months of kind of cajoling him with my crazy idea, he agreed to start the company with me. And I found an amazing software developer online in a founder matching program and convinced one of my old coworkers to come to work for us. And we officially launched our business in May of 2023. We spent the first 6 months building the initial product. And what happens a lot of times in public health and with nonprofits that want to build technology is that they pay a third-party firm to build their tool for them. And technology is not a static thing, right? It is constantly evolving. And so what tends to happen is that either you get a bunch of really knowledgeable people about a specific subject together, but nobody who really understands technology, and you come out with something that is scientifically valid, but not very engaging for a user. Or you create something with a third party that is great for the first 6 months, but because it is not constantly upkept and because they're not innovating and staying up with the technology, after 6 months, it just kind of becomes defunct and it withers away on a shelf. And my goal was, how do we build a product in collaboration with the people that need the help? And so we spent about 6 months creating what we call an MVP, the minimal viable product, and we put it out to market. And I went on a podcast with Brian Hatch. It was a great podcast. And I shared my story for the first time publicly, and I had a panic attack because at that point, my parents didn't even really know. So that was a trippy experience. We got our first 30 users or so, and we just started looking at the data, talking to them, learning what they liked, what they didn't like, what was working, and we just kept updating it. And we released another big update in May of last year, and we launched 2 pilot programs. One with the Oregon Health Authority. The Oregon Department of Health has this awesome gambling resource program. And we started giving Evive to people that were in treatment in Oregon. And we launched one with the Illinois Council on Problem Gambling, again, giving Evive to people that were in treatment in these systems. And we got great feedback from the providers and the clinicians and the people using the product. And we took all of that and we did a bunch of work. And as of the 13th of January, we launched our version 2, which I'm extremely proud of and I think really represents everything that we've learned over the last 18 months or so and is really the foundation of the products that we're excited to have out there in the market.
I'm so glad that you talked about how you put together your team because when I was doing my research and looking at your team, I was really wowed by how many different professional backgrounds you have on your team. I mean, you have folks with decades of experience in advocacy and clinical work related to problem gambling. You have doctors, you have tech experts. And I have to be honest that a lot of the time when I think about interdisciplinary collaboration, which I personally love being part of, I think of people who are still in the same kind of realm, but have different backgrounds. Like I often think of that as like a dynamic hospital team where you have doctors, nurses, social workers, psychologists, but to combine folks in the way that you have to take tech and recovery and medicine, is kind of wild. So I would love to hear more about what that experience has been like.
Yeah, it's super hard. I will start with that. Man, we are so lucky. I really think that if we are going to solve this problem, and what I mean about this problem is gambling related harm, right? Our whole mission at Evive is that no matter where you are in your relationship or your journey with gambling, we're going to help you with no stigma, no shame, resources that meet you where you are and that resonate with you and your experience, whether that means your learning style or your cultural background or how you see your goals related to gambling. We are just going to be there. And that universal approach, I think, is often it's not very common in the gambling space, at least, right? You hear a lot of people talk about, well, we do prevention and we do harm reduction and we do recovery. And there's a lot of people that are applying apps like mobile applications to recovery. The challenge for me is that a very, very small percentage of people get into recovery from a gambling problem. And I was one of those people, and it took me like a decade. And I look back at my own experience and I say, man, I want the best possible people that are experts in prevention to be there to talk to people and get that information in front of people before they have problems. And then when they start to have problems and they start to wobble and they realize that, man, I don't identify as a gambling addict, but I don't like the way that this is showing up in my life. Or I just had an experience where I said I was going to spend 100 and I spent 500. Like, what's going on? I want to show up for them at that point with the right people and the right information in the right way. And if someone does get to the point where they do develop an addiction and they need help and they need to get into recovery and they decide that they need to stop gambling, which is me, right? Like I have to not gamble and I have to maintain a gamble-free life. It is the foundation of everything that I do. Well, we need those people and those experts. So there is no one way to build that healthier relationship with gambling. And as such, if I really want to accomplish that mission, I have to go out and I have to find all of these people and I have to put them together and we have to try to synthesize all of this knowledge into a single product. And it's really challenging. And it's not because anybody is right and anybody is wrong. I mean, there's been so much learning on both sides. In the early days of working with Jeff, I mean, I just have to give Jeff so much credit. This guy is very well respected in his field. He could ride off into the sunset and not get involved in some crazy thing like this. And he just jumped in with both feet. He saw the opportunity to make an impact in a way that he felt like was meaningful. And he doesn't know how these things work, but he's really embraced it. And so we spent months in the beginning working with Jeff and saying, okay, what does the clinical experience look like? If somebody comes into your office and they say, I have a gambling problem, what do you do? And the trick is, we're not trying to take that experience and just put it into an app, right? We're trying to take the best pieces of that experience and apply technology to them so that we are really making the biggest impact in the most scalable way. And there's disagreements all the time between folks on our scientific advisory board and partners that we work with. And we just try to lead with the data and take everybody's feedback and find ways to bring it all together. So I think it's necessary, but it's very challenging. Sorry, that was a long answer.
No, it's an honest one and something that comes up a lot in our conversations on this show is that the right thing is often the harder thing. It would have been simpler to make a problem gambling app with just tech people, but would that have really been what you needed? Or, either of the options you shared before, or to just bring together folks who were experts in the field, but didn't have the tools to make the app. And so I
I
just
think the other
appreciate that.
piece, thank you. I mean, I firmly believe in it. And I think that the other piece that we're just so incredibly fortunate with is we have Dr. Deborah Haskins as the chair of our scientific advisory board. Because one of the things that I just recognize is my experience with gambling is my experience with gambling. And that comes from me, right? It comes from my socioeconomic and cultural background. And part of the big challenge in this space is health equity. We're not doing a good job of treating people that have $150 an hour to pay for a private therapist. If you look at the real outcome rates from treatment, we're sure as heck not doing a good job of helping the people that don't. The people that are already disenfranchised and don't have access or don't look at that model as kind of their model of health. One of the benefits of technology like this is that it can meet people where they are. It can really become hyper personalized. And we've been working really, really hard on making sure that this shows up equitably and representatively and really meets everybody. Dr. Deborah Haskins and Dr. Paulette Ogilvie, both on our board, have been phenomenal advocates and so helpful in that.
Yeah, and something I keep saying I was moved by, I keep feeling moved by things you're saying or that I've seen in your app. But I was moved when I first looked at Evive and I saw that one of the first things you see is a header that says choose your path with the options keep it safer, cut back, and stop gambling. And I think something that we get so wrong in prevention and in outreach is making that assumption that everyone's experience is the same or that anyone who has kind of felt this little voice or push that like something has to change is ready to just never gamble again the moment that they have that feeling. That's just so not realistic. And I think it just struck me as so welcoming that that was one of the first things you see and does feel tied to this idea that this is for everyone and that you're really focusing on the accessibility that technology provides us. Like we were talking about the ways that technology has, I mean, really, there's a much broader conversation about the ways that technology can cause harm. And it's happening in the gambling sphere when we talk about sports betting and cryptocurrency, but also the connection that it allows us to form with others, the ways that we can reach out, the way that you can download an app for free and get help. It's really amazing.
And I think one of the things that's often overlooked about gambling is, I'm speaking a little out of turn because I do not know firsthand what it's like to experience an opioid addiction, for example. But with gambling, you think that the thing that you're addicted to is going to solve all of your problems, right? Every day you wake up and you're like, yeah, okay, this might be bad for me, but all I got to do is get that one big win and everything's going to be okay. So when you make the decision to quit gambling forever, you have to give up that fantasy that you're going to win it all back. And that is one of the most difficult aspects in my mind about choosing abstinence. It's also one of the reasons that, in my experience, the people that do get into recovery and choose full abstinence from gambling are people like me who have experienced so much harm that they're like, man, if I don't do this, my life is over, or I've devastated myself financially. And so it's tricky, right? Because if one of my friends came to me personally, Sam DeMello, and was like, "Man, I got a problem with gambling," I'd say, stop forever." Right? It's the best decision that I ever made. But man, do I understand why that's such a hard pill to swallow and why it keeps so many people from doing anything about it. Because if that's the only option, I won't take it. So, really, the product is designed to be super welcoming, and it's also designed to just help somebody understand their own relationship. Our hypothesis, and what we see in a lot of other, what I would call kind of sober curious apps, like there's a great one for alcohol called Reframe. The idea here is if we can get somebody to just engage in the conversation, they might then discover, man, I really do need to stop gambling, right? And that's that pathway to abstinence. So just because somebody starts on a harm reduction model or in a safer play model doesn't mean that we don't get them to the safest possible point. And if they can continue to gamble and it doesn't detrimentally impact their life, great. I'm not anti-gambling, which I think surprises a lot of people. I'm anti-gambling harm. I just don't want people to experience the really terrible things that I have and that millions of people do silently.
Well, and I think one of the most harmful parts of an addiction is the isolation. That isolation can just perpetuate so much harm. And so to think about someone opening an app and seeing that they're not alone and the difference and vulnerability required to do that than to go to a GA meeting. I mean, it's huge. That's a huge expanse that you're crossing by offering something that they can open on their phone where the connection stands, and it really is different for everyone. You know, going to a GA meeting might be the thing that changes someone's whole world, but for someone else, it's a download.
I love what you just said. Whatever your pathway is, the goal of Evive is not to say, hey, this is our path, this is our patented way to achieve your goals. It is, here's the subway map and all of the different possible options open to you. We are constantly promoting things like GA and smart recovery and helping people find meetings in their own locations. We're helping them find board certified therapists with experience in gambling. We're helping them connect to 1-800 Gambler and the text lines. E5 is not, this is an app that you should give somebody that is already in treatment. Evive, in my mind, is the 21st century version of 1-800 Gambler. It is a modern helpline. If we're going to meet people where they are, this is where people are. They're online, right? That is where they are gambling.
Absolutely. I have kind of a two-part question that I want to ask you,
Sure.
that I want to understand better. Can you just speak to how Evive has expanded since you started it? You're partnering with individuals, but you're also partnering with entire states. So, can you just speak to these very large-scale partnerships that you've developed?
Yeah. So my goal is not to make individuals pay for Evive. We do not want to be a consumer business. Our goal is to bring technology to the public health space and make this accessible to everyone. And so our business model is we try to provide this service as a partner to a state that pays for other services like treatment or 1-800 numbers, for example. have them cover the cost of Evive and the cost of us really deeply customizing the app so that it shows up with all of the resources that someone would need in that state. And that when somebody downloads it in a state like Virginia or Oklahoma or Nevada, where they have these partnerships, it's free for them. And it says, congratulations, this is brought to you for free by, whoever our partner is. And the goal for us is, again, it's not to take away or replace the existing infrastructure. It's to amplify everything that these states are already doing. So our hypothesis is that by making a discrete mobile app that looks good and is user-friendly and engaging, we can actually take more people that aren't doing anything about their gambling and bring them into the system and get them help. So that's our goal. It's been, like anything, slow and steady, and we've had to be very persistent. Our first partners were very small, and instead of being at the state level, they were just within these treatment communities where maybe there were 400 or 500 patients enrolled, and we were just trying to get feedback on the app. I'm really, really excited to share that in 2025, we have partnerships inked with Oklahoma. So every resident of Oklahoma will get access to Evive for free, and Nevada and Virginia, which we're really, really excited about. And my hope, my dream is that this is available in every state at the national level. Anybody that needs to use it can have it for free, and that we are making enough money where instead of me having to spend my time doing business development and trying to sell this state by state, that we're able to use all of our energy into building more features and doing things like translating the app into multiple different languages so that it can really show up for everybody. So we're getting there. The snowball is really starting to take off. Last year, between January 1st and December 31st of 2024, we had over 1,200 people download the app, which is not a huge number in tech terms, but we had no marketing. We had no marketing spend. It was all kind of word of mouth. And this year, we will be doing marketing on social media. We have these statewide sponsorships. These states are starting to promote it the same way that they do their other resources. And we're really, really excited to see where this goes.
Yeah, and I'm sure from your perspective, you who are doing this work day in and day out, it does feel like slow moving. To me on the outside, I'm like, this is taking off. All these states are partners, and there's going to be so many more this year. I mean, it just is really impressive, and it speaks to what you have, that so many people are wanting to partner with you. I think from talking about your board and your team having these really well-respected folks wanting to jump into this, and now having really large partners wanting to jump into this. I have my thoughts on why people are so eager to be involved with this project, but no one's really listening to this episode to hear me talk about Evive. So I would love to know why you think that people are so eager to be part of it.
Yeah, I appreciate that. That perspective is good for me. I think it's hard when you're in it day in and day out, and I'm always looking at the problem first, and it's like I just see the DraftKings ads all over the place, and not to pick on DraftKings, but it's just every sports game is just I see how this is ramping up, and I just think of the millions of people that are suffering silently, and then I think, oh my God, we got to be doing more and we got to be doing it quicker, etc. But no, it's really taken off, and it's really exciting and honestly humbling, especially as you said, these incredibly amazing, brilliant people that are on our board and want to contribute. And they just make me feel like the dullest crayon in the box on these meetings. But I think that people are really excited because I think that there is an understanding, I mean, a real understanding that gambling has changed and is changing, and the issues that are being created by online gambling and sports books and sweepstakes apps and all of these other new types of gambling, the public health system and the way that this infrastructure is set up and how quickly it moves, it's not keeping up, right? It's not a secret that we need to show up better and engage more people. And fighting technology with technology, I think, is really exciting for a lot of folks. I think the second piece is that we talk a lot about the features of the app and what it provides in terms of education and community and accountability for the end user. But a huge part of what we do is collect this really robust set of data and offer this to our state partners. And I don't mean personal data like emails and names and things, but like what lessons or resources are people in Virginia engaging with, right? What is needed? How are these people engaging and when are they engaging? And how are they reporting their gambling activities and their feelings around gambling? Right now, most of the data that we look at is from calls to a helpline. That data is extremely limited. Somebody might call in once, have a 3-minute conversation, get a referral to a Gamblers Anonymous meeting, and we have no idea what happens to them, right? For us, we have people that are using this app 200 days consecutively, and they're checking in, they're using resources, and we can see how they're feeling. And so, right now, it's early days as we continue to grow the user base. But as we really start to collect data here, we're going to be able to really learn about what this looks like. What does recovery look like? And how do we improve the tools that we offer our users? And where should the state be allocating their budgets, right? What resources should they be promoting? What messages really resonate with people? We can take that into public health marketing. My dream here, my vision for Evive is that this is a cycle. It really is, back to your point about this kind of interdisciplinary team, it's really a platform that facilitates this conversation between people that are struggling with gambling and people that are trying to do something about it. And it does it in a way that makes the data really usable and powerful. And I hope that 5 years from now, we're saying, oh my God, we've learned so much. We've improved how we treat this and how we prevent this. That is really my dream for this company.
It's very hopeful. The idea of what this is now for people and what it could be.
I'm a very optimistic guy, you know?
Yeah.
I think a lot of people that get into recovery from whatever they were dealing with, I'm so grateful. I'm so optimistic. Every day, I'm so thankful for where I am, and I recognize where I was, that it's easier for me now to look into the future and just imagine that if I just keep putting bricks in the wall every day, we're going to build something. And I'm so lucky to be able to do this. I mean, one of the things that has been really amazing for me is just getting kind of embraced by the problem gambling community and all of these different people that are working in the space. There's so many amazing people, and I'm just really thankful that it feels like my skills and what I can bring to the table are starting to make an impact, you know?
Yeah. If someone's listening and they're hearing you like talk about that hope and that gratitude and all the things that recovery has brought to you, and they're feeling like that little tug that maybe things could be different for them too, what would you say to them?
Yeah, I think we've talked about it a couple times in this episode, but man, for me personally, the isolation was the worst part. If you're feeling any tug like that, talk to somebody about it. And I spent so many days of my life being convinced that everybody would look down on me and be ashamed of me and not want to be my friend. God, none of that was true. Oh my God, when I opened up and told people what I was going through, they were just like, "Yeah, that's terrible. How can I help you? How can I support you?" I think oftentimes we build these stories in our minds that just aren't true. And I understand where they come from. So that would be my number one piece of advice. Reach out and talk to somebody. Obviously, if you're struggling with gambling, hopefully Evive can be there for you. This is our goal. 1-800-GAMBLER is also there. But there are so many people and awesome resources out there that are trying to help. And it's really about just taking that first step. I wish I would have done it a heck of a lot earlier than I did, you know?
Yeah. And now you're giving people the tools to do it.
That's the goal.
Yeah. It's pretty amazing. Well, I've already taken much more of your time than I told you I would. So one last question, Sam.
Sure.
Our signature namesake question. What does the process of awareness to action mean to you?
Ooh, I should have been prepared for that question. The process of awareness to action. For me, it took me a really long time to become aware of what gambling was doing to my life. Even though I rationally understood it on some level, I didn't really understand everything that it was costing me. And once I did, it wasn't really a choice for me to take action or not. I felt compelled to. I think in my own recovery, it made me more aware of what I had to offer and what was important to me and what my value system was. I think the process of going through an addiction like this and getting into recovery kind of forces you to strip away a lot of the layers and look really deeply at like who you are and what's under the hood. And when I really became aware of those things, it became very clear to me what I needed to do in my life to feel fulfilled. And for me, that was taking action in this space of problem gambling. And I think that there's a lot of ways to do that. For me, it was just about looking at what I had to offer and what I felt like the space needed and trying to bring that to life. And it ended up as this company called Evive. But I think people can do that in all kinds of different ways. It's just about figuring out what makes you tick and then going after it.
I 100% agree. Thank you so much for joining us today, Sam, for sharing your story and for really talking through how Evive came to be and what you hope for it to be in the future. I just really appreciate your time.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me. And just to make sure that people know where to find it, you can find us online at www.getevive.com. That's GETEVIVE.com, or in the App Store on iOS and Android.
And we'll have all of that linked in the episode description as well. So I encourage everyone, even if gambling is not a part of your life, to check it out because it's just a really amazing resource. So thank you again, Sam.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening, and thank you to Sam for joining us. Again, I highly recommend checking out Evive. It's an amazing tool, and I also recommend subscribing to Awareness to Action so you don't miss out on any future episodes.